right, so this lesson is titled, Oh, to be like thee. We sing that song from time to time, Oh, to be like thee. And I wonder how often we really consider that. And as a Christian, that's certainly ultimately our goal, is to be like Christ. We can't be perfect, of course, like he was, but we can certainly emulate and pattern ourselves after his life. The text that this is taken from, this particular lesson, is taken from Matthew chapter 16, and starting in verse 24 through 26. And it reads this way. Then Jesus said unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. Whoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. For what is man profited if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Kind of a point blank and a straightforward sort of a verse, isn't it? And I know Jim's presentation is more of a lecture based, but I certainly want to open this up to your conversation and some feedback from you folks. If you have questions or comments or want to participate, feel free to do that, because we want to open this up, because this is everyday life things, and certainly living the Christian life begins with denying yourself. And that sounds easy, but that's not so easy, is it? When you start to dig into what it means to deny yourself, you see real quick that this is a difficult proposition. Let's look at the introduction here. The introduction says, since the introduction of sin into the world, men have cast off the love and fear of God and given themselves to the dominion of self-love. In other words, once we've sinned, we have a tendency to want to go back to that sin and forget God and not necessarily deny ourselves, because sin is pleasurable. We like it. It's good it makes us feel good on the outside. Of course, God certainly is telling us that we need to deny ourselves. And of course, then, since the introduction of sin to the world, men have acted selfishly, making their own will and honor most important to themselves. And that is something that we definitely keep in mind, and it's true. Look at Romans chapter 3 with me and verse 9. Romans chapter 3 and verse 9 through 18 is the verse that he refers to here. And he says, What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise, for we have before proven both Jew and Gentile that they are under sin. And as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understands. There is none that there is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way, that they are together become unprofitable. There is none like that doeth good, no, not one. Their throat is an open sepulchre, and their tongues they have used to deceit. The poison of asp is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatsoever the law says, it says to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped and all the world may be found guilty before God. So we certainly realize that that is the life and the circumstances that we find life today, that it feels anyways as if nobody is doing God's will in their lives. It certainly feels that way. Certainly recognizing sinful man's needs is a part of it. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. That's the whole point of his coming in the first place. God gave him the gospel to bring back to this. God gave him the gospel to bring him back to the state from which he had fallen. That is man, of course. The first step toward this restoration is to deny ourselves, and that's what we looked at here in Matthew chapter 16. So that's kind of the introduction to this lesson. Some general observations about self-denial. Slide this up here for you. Self-denial. For one to follow Jesus, it must be by his own free will and convictions, voluntarily renouncing everything which might be hindering his discipleship. And that's a lot of talk to say, basically, we've got to give up some things that we might want to do. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 with me in verse 21. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 in verse 21. I'm going to read this from the New King James. I had been reading from the Old King James, but let me read this from the New King James. Test all things and hold fast to that which is good, and abstain from every form of evil. Self-observation of this self-denial. So we must recognize that there is right and wrong. And self-denial is complete submission to the will of God. And that's easier said than done. It's easy to say, I'm going to submit to God's will. It's a whole nother to do it, isn't it? What self-denial, Roman number 2 here says, what self-denial does not mean nor require. So we think sometimes that self-denial, and there are those that say that, well, Christians should live in a cave and only come out on, and they collect Lent, and they only come out when the sun is shining, or, they have some of these notions of what a Christian life should be. And I don't believe that's the case, of course, and we don't see that from the scriptures in any way. It does not mean that we don't have an obligation to take care of our own affairs. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8 says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So certainly being a Christian is not being a hermit, crawling into a cave and never coming out. That's obviously not what self-denial is all about. It's not about, see if I can pull this up here a little bit better. Self-denial is not about this idea of refusing temporal honors or riches bestowed in a lawful and honorable way. In other words, it's not a bad thing to have things. There's nothing wrong with it as long as those things that we have don't have us. And that's what typically what generally we struggle with. As Christians, we're trying to emulate Christ in our life, at the same time balancing regular, ordinary life. It does not give one a license to be careless of his life and health and family. Of course, we know that. It does not require that one devise himself or keep himself from, deprive himself of certain comforts. So in other words, there's those that believe that being a Christian, you can't have a nice car, you can't have a nice house, you better not have nice clothes. That's not what it's saying at all. It's certainly a myth that sometimes people believe. We're not to divide or deprive ourselves of comforts and conveniences of material benefits of the world because of things that happen with the industry and that sort of thing. Acts chapter 5, notice Acts chapter 5 with me and verse 4. Acts chapter 5 and verse 4 says, while it remained, was it not your own? Speaking of Ananias and Sapphira, who had offered money to the church, to the disciples. While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not your own to control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? Have you not lied to men? You have not lied to men, but to God. And so whatever they possessed, I mean, who knows how much they had? I'm not told exactly how much they had there. When they sold the land and then they gave it to the disciples, of course. How much did they have? They may have had a whole lot. We're not told. And when it was in their control, they have every right to do with it as they want. Yes, ma'am.
So I have two things and I have a question.
All right.
So we were talking about the introduction of this and the denial of self.
Yes.
So it made me think of, I think a true representation of what human nature is a toddler.
Okay.
Because they are, like, innately, we are selfish people. When you think about a toddler, mine.
Right.
I want what I want when I want it.
Right.
And if I don't get what I want when I want it, I will throw myself on the ground
Right.
and scream
Calls a fit.
give it to me.
Right.
That's something that we are, as people, are not taught that. When you're two, we're not really, we're just starting to teach you things. That's kind of the way that we are born.
Mm-hmm.
Like that naturally we have this, because at that point it's taking care of your basic needs. So we're selfishly doing these things because when you were a baby, you cried when you needed to have your needs fulfilled.
Right.
And then we spend all this time teaching our kids and things. Well, some people don't. But our kids that you don't do that I will share my toy with Don.
Right.
Because Don might want to play with it too.
Right.
Or, it's not all about me. It's not all about I throw a hissy fit and I get what I want. So but at some point, and then they get that because Christians in that age where we still struggle with it, but a lot of times he gets it that it's not about me.
Right.
But at some point, it's like we almost stop teaching that.
Right.
And then we revert back to, like, in the early 20s and forward, it's all about me again. Yeah. Because that's what that culture of our does. It's about me and what I want. I want to go out and party. I want to go out and do this. So somewhere we just stop teaching this idea of what it's almost like those lessons that we teach our kids. Like, we still need to just continue. Yeah. Because you still need to share.
That's right.
You're 60 years old.
Right.
You still need, we still need to be taught to share, but all of that just stops.
Right.
Like, okay, you're grown.
You got this figured out now.
And you're done.
Yeah, you're right.
And then with the self-denial, I know that I think women struggle with this a lot, is the feeling that you can't say no.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And if you say no, then God's going to be unhappy. They'll use that one. You're a Christian, you can't ever tell me no. Right. And I don't think that that's what they're saying. Because there were times even that Jesus took time away. Yes. That's right. He took that self-care time, but I think there's so much pressure to be everything for everyone. Right. That we forget that you can't pour from an empty cup. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Women are notorious for this. Sure, I'll help you with this. I'll do this. I'll grab this. I'll do that. But then we're made to almost feel bad if you say no. Yeah. You said yes to all these things. Why are you telling me no? And then you're kind of guilted into. Soon enough, you're broken down. But I guess the question then that I have with this, I've never understood this idea that we as Christians should not enjoy the good things of the world. Sure. I get everything that is sinful. Like, I think about verses, or James 1:17. It's every good and perfect gift is from above. Right. So, and I don't know. I guess I kind of want your opinion. Like, does that mean, people look down on somebody because they don't get their hair done? Or, that's not sinful. Right. So can I then assume that that is I get it. A good thing? Sure. Yeah. Our cars. Right. You have a good, reliable vehicle. Right. That shouldn't be looked at as how dare you have it. That should be that to me falls into that good and
Yeah, you're onto something here, I think. And what we find is we've all seen it. And in life, there's extremes. All right, you have one extreme, we'll call them Amish for an example, just use them as an example, who say, absolutely not. Any pleasure of this world, you should deny yourself of it. And if it aids you in some way, get rid of it. So you can't have a car, you can't have electricity, you can't have anything that is anything worldly at all. All right, is there anything worldly about running these electrical lights in here? It's an assistant. If it weren't for that, I probably couldn't read this. So it's an assistant. But the other extreme is everything that I work my entire life and my whole world revolves around stuff. And everything that I live for the acquiring of more and more stuff. And I've got a 6-bedroom house with 8 bedrooms or 8 bathrooms, but I want one that's got 10 bedrooms and I don't need it. In other words, where does it begin? Where does it stop? We have these two extremes. And I think, my opinion anyway, somewhere in the middle is probably right.
So I believe electricity is good. And
yes.
God clearly created the individual who made electricity. Right. And maybe I'm wrong. I feel like when the Lord blesses us with these things or with these people to do these, don't use it to impact his kingdom or what,
Yeah.
We are kind of shunning the blessing that
I agree.
he's provided to us. Like he's provided
absolutely
so many things. If we choose not to use it, because I don't want to be worldly. Look, God created the world.
Right.
So innately, like you're always going to have worldly things because that's what was created. Like it's completely impossible to separate yourself from the world that God created.
Right.
You're not utilizing the blessings that he has bestowed upon the world or the gifts.
Misusing what he's given you.
Right. Yeah. Misappropriating his blessings.
I think that's true.
Kind of making him almost look foolish because I can just see him going, I gave you electricity.
Right. Right. And you're burning candles.
It's like, for the Amish, if they would plow, utilize those things, they would be able to plow quicker, which would provide them with more time. Yeah. I don't know. That's just something that it's always, they tell you get out and don't be part, but the Lord has created things that are in this world, and I think he wants us to.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really do. I think you're on to something. But the point is, I think with the author, I don't even know who wrote this necessarily, but the point is, I think with self-denial is, you hit on it a little earlier, is we have this stuff. God has blessed us with all this stuff. How am I using the stuff that God has blessed me with to glorify him? There's where self-denial comes in, because the ones that don't deny themselves say, well, this is all mine, and we still have that toddler attitude that says, back away, it's my stuff, you can't have it. And yet self-denial says, God has blessed me with this stuff, and you need some? Here's what I can give you. I can open my stuff up and self-deny. In other words, self-denial would be the type of person that allows an open hand to give back to some of these things. Selfless denial, in other words, those that won't deny themselves are those that keep it all for themselves. I think that you're onto something there. Don, you have a thought?
Yeah, I just think about something.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good things that God has given to us.
Yeah.
We've many times.
Sure.
Turn the name something.
Right.
You mentioned the lights up here.
Yeah.
I guess I think about that. The lights go out.
Yeah.
They don't have electricity here for a few days. Oh, I'm not coming to worship them.
Right.
In other words, we take the good things and we make those idols in our life. And we can't do without them.
You're right.
I think that's the part that is bad.
Right.
God has given us so many things that we
Oh, yeah.
take advantage of and should.
That's right.
Like you say, be able to share with others
Right.
what they don't have.
Right.
But don't use it in the sense that it becomes an evil thing in our life.
Exactly right. Yeah. Good thoughts. Anybody else on this thought? How are you being how do you deny yourself with the things that God has provided and blessed you with? Or do we? You see, that's the whole point. If you're going to be like Christ, then self-denial has got to be first and foremost as a part of what you're doing.
I think it's easy to do that when it is something you don't care about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's easy for me to deny myself of particular things because I just, it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, right. But when it becomes something that
The hardest thing in the world, and this is on to the last thing. Okay. So we as a family innately love peanut butter.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Right. Right.
We love the pumpkins, but if somebody would walk out and I have one pumpkin and that's the only pumpkin I'm going to get, and somebody walks, Don really needs that because
Yeah.
having
Right.
an issue and we really need that pumpkin for something, or somebody wants it, or even Christian looks at you like, Mommy, can I have it?
Right.
In those moments, that's when you know if you really can deny yourself
Right.
and give that
Yeah.
to someone else.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like when there's something that you really,
Yeah.
if you ask him that he can't have,
Did you?
you gotta deny him.
You're right.
Because,
Right. Yeah.
those are silly
Yeah. Right. Right.
It is when the Lord calls upon you to do something, and it's something
That's the
that
point.
you really
Right.
love, or you really,
Yeah.
that's when this comes into play. It's easy
Right.
for me to say, I could eat here without electricity.
Right.
Yeah, I could probably do it for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
But to live, something would happen and I had to live that way for whatever reason, or somebody needed to move, this is my house and I want,
Right.
outsiders out.
Right. Right.
If somebody had to move into my house temporarily because they didn't, that
Yeah.
for me would be tough. To
Yeah.
have somebody in my
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Am I doing okay?
That's right. Right.
It's in those moments where it's something that is
Right.
difficult for you or that you care about.
That's the point. That's a good point. Don, did you have something you was going to add to that?
No.
Oh, I thought you'd said something. Okay.
He just wants to know in the pumpkin.
Oh yeah, he just wants the he wants the Reese cups, right?
Kids were, if they were not making cakes,
Yeah,
I could live, I could
yeah.
live with that.
You'd have to go to cookies or something. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
I do else with your pumpkin.
Yeah, I get it. But the point is, denying yourself, it's kind of along the lines of when the Bible speaks of our giving. And the giving that we give to the Lord is supposed to be a sacrifice in a sense. In other words, we're not to go out and kill a calf, slaughter it, put it on an altar. But you think about what those folks gave up. They denied themselves of. They denied themselves of the very best one. They have a flock of 50 cows, let's say, or sheep. And they go out and they pick the very best one of the bunch and offer it. That goes to what you're saying. Are we willing to do that? Or would we take the one that's, he's hobbling, he's got 3 legs, one's bad leg, he's got a bad eye, and it doesn't really matter that much to us. Are we going to sacrifice that one? That's the one we lean towards. God's saying, I want the perfect one, the pristine one, the one that is show cattle ready. He's ready for the show fair. And that's the one we should sacrifice. That is self-denial.
Well, and if you were going to get rid of it anyways.
Yeah.
Then you're not denying it.
Exactly. That's right.
You're just using it transactionally.
Exactly.
It's like the people that don't.
Yep.
furniture where it says you're only supposed to put clothing.
Right.
You're not denying
Yeah.
yourself of anything. You're just
Yeah.
putting your garbage off on somebody else.
Exactly. I'm sure there's junk, actually garbage in those places too. Yeah. Any thoughts on this? It's an interesting thought, to think about what self-denial really is all about. Sometimes we kind of pass by that and we don't really give it its due consideration. Just a few minutes left here. I don't know whether I was going to read this word for word. Keep this. We might, if we get into this more next week, if I have to fill in next week also for Jim, I'll probably refer back to this. So keep this and look at this. But I thought it was interesting. I hate to kind of skip through some of this because there's a lot of good material. But go to the discussion questions on page 2, which is on the back side of page 1. And let's look at some of these questions here as we conclude, because he really took me by surprise with a couple of these questions. And I really thought they might be good for us to consider. If you look at the discussion questions there on page 2, about middle ways down there, the first one, he says, why do you think that so little emphasis is placed on self-denial when teaching one what he must do to be saved?
Because they're a baby.
Well, that's one. That's true. That's true. But what I think his point is, we focus on hear, believe, repent, and be baptized, and make sure that you've got all those things down. But yet, I don't know that anybody ever talks about, maybe very little, about self-denial. In other words, realizing that when you obey the gospel, you're denying yourself. Well, what does that mean? How often do we really talk about that? Probably not enough, right? No doubt not enough. So little emphasis is given on that. Number 2, how is self-denial related to the first and great commandment found in Matthew 22:37? Look at that again. Matthew chapter 22. And start in verse 37. I think you folks on Zoom can probably unmute and chime in if you'd like, because I think we could probably hear you just fine if you did. So if you have a comment and you want to chime in, that's perfectly fine. Might be a good test to see how well that works if you did, so we can know that might work for the future if you did. But anyways, Matthew 22, verse 37, Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang the law and the prophets. So how is self-denial related to the first and great commandment, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind? What's left? If you love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, there's nothing left for yourself then, is it? It is giving your all to God. And too often, I've found myself guilty of it, where we submit to God, we deny ourselves, but we keep a little bit back in reserve for ourselves. I keep a little bit back because I want to keep a few things back for myself instead of giving my all to God. Any thoughts on question 2 there? Yeah, Don?
Well, I could believe that we talked about how do we say it?
Yeah.
And we say go through this step, this step, this step.
Right.
And I was thinking if we go through it, talk about commitment.
Right.
And I think commitment comes under the self-denial.
It does. You're right.
If we're really committed,
Right.
the other's going to take care of itself.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's this truly committing ourselves. And Amanda brings up, and she's right about bringing it up, Galatians 2 and verse 20 a lot of times. If you look at Galatians chapter 2, I think about that verse a lot. And look at Galatians chapter 2. It speaks to that very thing that Don just talked about. And look at verse 20, and she brings it up once in a while, and it's a good verse to keep in mind. In Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, It says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Have you really, truly crucified yourself when you obey the gospel? It is exactly what Don was speaking about in this idea of commitment and committing ourselves to really, truly giving up of ourselves. Or do we say, I'm going to hold on a little bit. I'm going to still hang on to a little bit of myself. And I'm going to give God just so much, and then I'm going to still hang on to some. I think there's some good bit of truth to that. Any thoughts on question 1 or 2? It's about 5 minutes. I'll ring the 5-minute bell here. We'll conclude this here. I don't know whether you like this type of a lesson or whether it's something we can continue on. I think it could be a benefit to us, and it goes on later on in this lesson in regards to having the mind of Christ and the Christian walk. We'll talk about that if we get to that point. So there's a lot of good things that can be talked about through this lesson. What are some things that can hinder one from being the proper disciple of Christ? What are some things that can get in our way and hinder us from really, truly self-denying? We've talked about a few of them here. Our money, our possessions, those things can be a hindrance. They can get in our way from really doing the right thing, can't they? How about our time? I would help, but I just don't have the time. Or maybe name some other things. What does it mean to take up your cross? You ever think about that? What does that mean? Obviously, there's something I've got to bear. The Christian life isn't all rainbows and Skittles, is it? There's some self-denial. There's some things I have to say no to that I want to say yes to. Just the facts. It's just the truth. And too often, we enter this life of a Christian by checking the boxes. Okay, I believe, I heard the word, I hear it, I believe it, I'll repent, I'll confess, Jesus is the Son of God. Okay, splash, get me wet, come back up, and carry on with normal life as normal. Nothing changes, nothing's changed, no denial of myself, nothing's really been crucified here. I continue doing, acting, living the same old way I've been living all along. That's not taking up our cross and bearing it. Think about a cross. Those things were heavy. About like, have you ever handled a railroad tie? Probably similar to that. Those things are heavy. They are. And so if you put two of those together, that thing's going to weigh quite a bit. So the load or the cross that we bear is a heavy load, a heavy cross to bear. Pick it up and go with it. Take it and bear it, he's saying. Any thoughts or questions? I think it's a good introduction. Yes, ma'am.
So I think for me, I don't know if we're still on number 3 or this.
No, actually, that's okay.
But number 3 got me thinking. So for me personally, my issue is that I'm just not, that makes it hard to self-deny. I'm not naturally like a loving person.
Yeah, right.
Like I don't.
Yeah. You're kind of like the Grinch.
It's hard.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
It's not that I don't love people.
Yeah.
But it's just I'm not. I would have probably been better in the Old Testament with God and I.
Yeah, I get it.
That's something that's hard for me. Like when somebody does something to me, where my denial comes in is I initially want to be like, you know what, you did this to me, I'm going to hit back harder.
Right.
And
you just bought the farm.
Yeah. And that's something that I know. You know, I don't necessarily struggle with stuff and things like that. But
I get it.
If you're
personal stuff.
I'm going to be double.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to show you don't want, and that's, and I work on that.
Yep.
Because it's not, but that's something I think with a lot of people, if you think about it, like innately, that's That's why I think the Old Testament had the eye for an eye, because it's easy that way. You do me wrong, fine, I'm just gonna put it back, and then, okay, we're even and we're done.
Right.
But that's not.
No, it's not the law of Christ.
You know, and it's really hard because there's this gentleman at Christians football that he drives me crazy. I cannot stand him. He drives me crazy. And all I want to do is just walk up to him and be like, you're.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I get it.
You know, I have to keep that in control, but that's kind of my self-denial.
Mm-hmm.
Is I can't lash out at every person that I feel. If I lashed out at every person I felt did me wrong, that's all I would get accomplished.
You're right.
You know, that's all I would get accomplished is yelling back at people. Right. That's
makes sense.
My way of self-denial is I need to deny my desire to just
get even.
To get even.
Yeah. I get it. Good thought, Don.
Well, going on with the man, you know, a Christian brother or sister is offended by something another one just said.
Right.
Or did.
Yeah.
And rather than be able to get past that, they keep going on that mountain year after year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Never letting go.
Right.
Because I haven't, like he said, I haven't gotten even.
Yeah.
And so you know, that's a part of that self-denial.
Yeah, it is.
You're perfect.
Right.
But I can forgive you, brother.
Right. It's tough, isn't it? That's a tough cross to bear. And that's the point that he's making
you have
here.
to be willing to forgive even if they are not willing to ask.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
The hardest part.
Right. They're still, you know. Yeah.
Because it's hard.
Right. Oh, yeah. I get it. Well, we're about out of time. Hope you enjoyed this lesson. Like I say, we'll look at this and keep this, because if next week comes and I'm still filling in for Jim, then we'll probably look at lesson 2. So you might sharpen your pencil on that, maybe have those questions answered and look over this lesson. We'll see how this goes, and if it's something we might want to keep with, and we'll maybe involve it in our Zoom. So thank you for your comments.